Now, what exactly did the US President Donald Trump say to Scotland's First Minister John Swinney when he came to Scotland just a week ago? That's what today's episode's all about. Okay, First Minister John Swinney, thank you so much for talking to us here. Just to start with, are you a whiskey lover or are you a whiskey drinker?
I am a whiskey lover and I'm a modest whiskey drinker. I don't drink an awful lot of alcohol nowadays. That part of my life it sort of departed a long time ago. But I occasionally drink whiskey, and I enjoy the whiskey that I drink when I do.
And if you take it, how do you take your whiskey?
I take my whiskey neat. I
Do
would
you?
drink a malt whiskey neat, and my preference, I've got a number of whiskies that I really like. I'm very fond of Aberfeldy whisky from my own constituency in North Perthshire. I also, I suppose, habitually have probably been very fond of Glenmorangie, and that's been very special to me. And there will be other whiskies around the country that I've sampled. My wife and I visited 𝗚𝘀𝘀𝘀 Distillery when it was just not long re-established during our honeymoon, actually in 2003, and I met an incredibly dynamic and eclectic figure, 𝗚𝗀𝘀𝘀𝘀, who was the master distiller at 𝗚𝗚𝘀𝘀𝘀, and he was part of a team who had resuscitated the distillery. It had been dormant for a long time, and it was marvellous to take in their story of the resurgence and the regeneration of 𝗚𝗚𝘀𝘀𝘀𝘀 Distillery.
It's interesting when you look at Scotland and you've got the flags behind you, and you and I are both Scottish, and when you think of what whiskey means to the country, you've got whiskey, you've got bagpipes, you've got tartan, you've got other things, but whiskey, in your mind, is it intrinsically linked with us, Scotch whiskey? What role do you think it plays with us?
Well, Scotch whisky, of course, is a unique product. It can only be produced in Scotland, so it gives it its unique umbilical association with the country. But I think, so that's deep enough. But I think there's even more significance around about that, which is about the knowledge around the world about Scotland is often framed by the association with whisky. And it's been an iconic product. And of course, the story of whisky, the romance of whisky, the connection of whisky to some of the most spectacular parts of the country. You think about the location of distilleries in different parts of Scotland, and they are just such a central part of the identity and the character of those parts of the country. So whisky is, in my view, a really significant part of our identity. And of course, when it comes to promoting Scotland in other countries and other markets, and I've done a lot of that in my time, it's actually a very easy sort of pathway into the conversation about Scotland, because people have a knowledge of whisky and are and understand that association with Scotland. So it's a start to a conversation which leads on to, of course, so many other strengths in the country, which can range around about the cultural identity of our country, or some of the technological or educational or academic strengths that the country has.
Economically, how important is it?
Very important, and it obviously generates employment in a vast number of areas of the country. In some circumstances, it's generating really intense high numbers of employment in different parts of the country, mainly in the central belt. But when you then go into some of the more remote localities, the employment numbers will be comparatively smaller, but within those communities, they will be significant employment numbers within those communities because of the sparseness of population. So whether it's in urban or rural Scotland, whisky is a significant economic contributor to our economy. It's obviously at local level a source of employment. It's a source of essentially connection to our agricultural strength. The barley that's grown right around the country, it makes its way significantly into the whisky distilling process. And we have also the wider tourism footprint that now comes from whisky, with so many distilleries being really powerful and significant tourist attractions around the country. So in a whole variety of different ways, whisky is economically very significant to Scotland.
I've just been handed a note that in your constituency, Perthshire, it was a hotbed of illicit distilling and smuggling in the 18th century. That's a source of pride, isn't it?
You bet. and who says it's just the 18th century?
Can we talk about your meeting with the US President Donald Trump? And we'll get into the politics, not the politics, but the hopes in terms of tariffs and the Scottish Whisky Association, etc. So you met Donald Trump. How did that come about, and how did the meeting go, the dinner? I don't know what you can say, but this is arguably the most powerful man in the world.
He is, and I think the connection and the pathway to our meeting in just last week it was, at Many Estate, really was sown back in December, when President Trump asked to speak to me by telephone, and he called one evening, and we had about a 20-minute conversation. We talked about the election in which he'd just been successful. We talked about his love of Scotland. It was abundantly clear in that conversation, his affection for Scotland, which comes from his mother was born in Lewis, and she maintained a lot of contact with her family in Lewis when she went to the United States. And then obviously his deep connection with golf and the association of golf with Scotland. So we had a very positive conversation back in December, where it was clear that he was well connected to Scotland. In March, Eric Trump, his son, who runs Trump International, asked to see me, and we had a meeting here in Bute House, where I am just now, and I welcomed him to Bute House and thanked his organisation, the Trump organisation, for their investment in Scotland, just as I would thank other investors who invest in Scotland, and it's important that I do that. And then when the President was coming in July to open his new course, I was invited to take part in a dinner and have a meeting with him on Tuesday morning of last week. And the dinner was in MacLeod House, named after his late mother, and there were about 22 people around the table. I was sitting to the left of the President, and we had, for the best part of an hour and a quarter, a one-to-one conversation over dinner, in which our conversation ranged across a whole range of different topics. We talked about the situation in the international situation. We talked about the domestic situation in Scotland. He asked me lots of questions about Scotland. He expressed and conveyed to me his love of Scotland, and we talked about some of the issues that were on my mind, particularly domestically, about the tariffs on Scotch whisky. And it was a welcome and positive conversation. And then I followed that up the following morning with another private meeting with President Trump, where we talked about the international situation and the issues that I'd raised with him about whisky. And he concluded the meeting that I had with him by saying to me, as he'd concluded the telephone call that we had in December, if there was anything on which he could be of help to Scotland, I should let him know, and he would see what he could do. And I think that's a welcome offer. Now, there'll be some people that think I shouldn't have met the President. Indeed, plenty of people comment about it, but I think most people in Scotland would be absolutely stunned if their First Minister did not take up an opportunity to talk to President Trump, particularly in the length of opportunity that I had to do so, to convey some of the issues of concern to people in Scotland, but also the hopes and the aspirations of people in Scotland too.
We'll get back to that episode in a second, but the best free way you can support the podcast is just hit the thumbs up button on this video and subscribe, so you get new episodes every week. It also helps lots more people find the podcast, so thank you. He drove off the first tee, but before that he asked you to stand up and said you're a good guy. Did you like him?
I had a pleasant and courteous exchange with President Trump, and I found his company, pleasant company, and we discussed lots of issues, and that's my job to do so.
The received wisdom, the report that came out from you was that afterwards you said you'd met Donald Trump and you asked him to consider the economic protections for Scotland and its whisky and its salmon, including the exemption from tariffs. So can we talk about that? Did you say to him, look, please, Donald Trump, as president, who is Scottish, half Scottish, as Scottish as I am, would you please look at the tariffs on salmon and whisky? And then did he say, right, I'll come back to you?
Well, the conversation was essentially along those lines, where I was making the pitch for the Scotch whisky industry and for Scotch whisky to be exempt from tariffs. And I obviously talked about the strength of Scottish salmon into the bargain to highlight the importance of products going to the States, particularly in Scotch whisky. What I was saying to him was that I thought there was an opportunity to take forward an approach that might also have benefits in the United States as well if Scotch was exempted from tariff. And the example I gave him was about Kentucky bourbon, where Kentucky bourbon can only be produced in Kentucky. Scotch whisky can only be produced in Scotland. And if it's not produced in either of those places, it can't be defined as those incredibly significant products. Now, Scotch whisky is sold into the United States and Kentucky bourbon gets sold into Scotland. There's also an important other trade, which is in casks, which come from Kentucky to Scotland, and Scotch whisky is matured in Kentucky bourbon barrels. And that's worth about $300 million per annum as a trade. So I was essentially putting to President Trump the opportunity for this, essentially just an exemption to be wrapped around these industries and to assist the Scotch whisky industry, because what the tariffs are doing just now, according to the Scotch Whisky Association, it's costing the industry about £4 million a week. And to go back to one of the questions you asked me earlier on, is whisky economically significant for Scotland? My answer is yes, it is. And obviously, if something is costing the industry £4 million a week, I want to try and do something about that to try to safeguard investment in the industry and investment in the product in the years to come.
We were talking to Annabel Thomas of McNean, and she said that she and her importer are absorbing the 10% tariff. So it's hit Scotch whisky hard, hasn't it?
It has, yes, undoubtedly. And that's something which, for me, as First Minister of Scotland, I want to try to do something about. So therefore, taking that case to the President of the United States and making that case on the occasion of his visit to Scotland, when his mind is on Scotland, I hope is an opportunity that's been well taken to try to advance the interests of the industry, because that will undoubtedly have a positive economic impact in Scotland if it was to be the case.
Before we move on, just briefly, did you genuinely get a sense from Donald Trump, the US president, that he's proud, that he's genuinely proud of his Scottish connections, that he loves the place? Is that what he said?
Oh, definitely, absolutely. And it was clear to me during the conversation I had with him on the telephone in December. It was also clear when Eric Trump came to see me and he talked about his grandmother's roots. He talked about his grandmother's roots in Lewis with as much affection as I would talk about my grandmother's roots in Orkney. And I could hear that in his in what he was talking about. So he was, that was what he conveyed to me. And President Trump, I gave President Trump a gift. I'd asked the Registrar General for Scotland to try and identify if there was something significant within our national records that I could share with President Trump about his connection with Scotland. And the Registrar General and their team, they did an absolutely magnificent job, and they found a handwritten ledger from the parish of Tong in Lewis, which in 1853 records the marriage of Mary MacLeod's grandparents. Now, compulsory registration came in 1855. So prior to that, it's a wee bit random or a wee bit potluck if the records are in our possession. The parish records the National Register of Scotland hold the parish records for the Church of Scotland, but it wasn't, you're not always guaranteed you're going to have those records coming. So the fact that they had the original ledger, so I got an extract to that copied and framed for President Trump, and along with an extract from the 1921 census from Stornoway, which includes, of course, for the first time in the census record, his mother, Mary MacLeod, at the age of 9. And I explained to President Trump the gift that I'd given him, and he was he was delighted and really touched by it, and enjoyed me explaining that. So I do genuinely think that he has an affinity to Scotland and a willingness to do what he can to help us.
He must have been, to coin a phrase, he must have been chuffed. Did he? I mean,
Well, he was delighted with it, and he was very touched that it was something so personal. There's many different types of gifts I could have given him from Scotland. Of course, I could have. There's a multiplicity of different things I could have chosen. I tried to find something that was personal, that would resonate with him and remind him of the depth of his family connection. And what he told me in the course of our conversation was that his mother, used to come back every year to Stornoway to see her family. And of course, we all know, any of us that have connections with the Western Isles know that that's a pattern that goes on all the time. I spend a bit of my summer in 𝗖𝘀𝘀𝘀, and it's exactly the same. You've got families that come back to see their family who are remaining on the island. So that journey, that voyage, is a significant part of island life, and it was obviously significant for President Trump.
Back to the whisky, and we spoke to Graham Littlejohn from the Scotch Whisky Association, and he gave us a long interview, and then he gave me a resume the other day of the things that he thinks the whisky industry would like. And if we can go back to the 10% tariff, he's hoping that you can lobby the UK government, or you can lobby the President Donald Trump, that when he comes for his state visit, you can help to use the state visit as a time and a place and a lever to make that happen. Do you genuinely think Mr. Trump might think about exempting Scottish whisky and salmon from the tariff on a state visit?
I think President Trump has this on his radar now. I don't think he had it on his radar before he came to Scotland 2 weeks ago today. I think he came to Scotland 2 weeks ago today, thinking that the US-UK trade deal was sort of all concluded and that was it. And I was putting on his radar the issue that there is a concern about Scotch whisky, and it's obviously the tariffs at the present moment are doing significant damage, and the hope that we could get to a position where those tariffs were removed. So I think before he came, I don't think it was on his radar. I think it is now. Now, will it result in a lifting of the tariffs? I don't yet know, but what I can say is that I'll do everything I possibly can do to make a persuasive case for that to happen. And I'm greatly helped by the work of the Scotch Whisky Association, who are contributing significantly to making that argument, and we'll work closely with them to try to advance those points.
I love telling the amazing story of Scotland's whisky industry and sharing some positivity about one of the incredible things this country has given the world. Now, if you want to share some positivity too, leave us a 5-star rating wherever you are listening to the podcast. It takes you 10 seconds and will help Cast to Glass reach a much, much wider audience. The other thing Graham Littlejohn was saying was he thinks it'd be good if you, as the Scottish government, lobbied the UK government for no more increase in excise tax. They've got this calculation that says, I don't know if he's already said this to you, but this calculation they've made which says the more tax they put on whisky, the less tax has been taken in. And they think that if they reduce the tax, the excise on whisky, you'd have more sales and there would be more income. Is that something on your radar?
There's always a fine balance to be struck about taxation. Whisky has often been in a position where the tax burden on the industry was not essentially related to the alcohol content of the different alcoholic products that were within that taxation regime. So I think there's got to be an element of fairness within that. I think we all accept there's got to be some taxation on whisky. Of course there has to be, but it's got to be on a fair basis. And I certainly want the industry to be in a position to be able to make a significant economic contribution to Scotland.
So would you agree then that maybe decreasing the tax on whisky would increase the tax take? It's the old corporation tax theory, isn't it?
It could have that effect, but you have to look very carefully at the economic modelling of what would be involved in that.
He also said that, just to move on, he said, yeah, from your point of view, so that's, lobbying the UK government because tax is reserved. But from your point of view, they would like to work with you to produce a growth plan for Scotch and try and make it, and it's a difficult topic, why would you make whisky the topic of a general election campaign or an election campaign? And he said that should be made part of the election in 26, that whole whisky strategy, a plan for whisky would be a good thing to do. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I think there's merit in that. There's obviously, all of this discussion has got to take place within the context of a debate about responsible alcohol consumption. But, in my view, the consumption of whisky has not been really the central issue about the responsible alcohol consumption debate that we've had. And indeed, the government enjoys very constructive relationships with the Scotch Whisky Association on that whole question of responsible alcohol consumption. So it's a well-developed relationship, and the industry contributes significantly to making sure that the right messages and the right actions are taken forward. But I think the whole question of the growth and the development of the whisky industry in Scotland is a different question.
Yeah.
It's about how we can use an iconic product, a significant proportion of which is exported to other countries and which is the source of enormous interest in other countries. And indeed, there's been some welcome news about tariffs in India, which have been reduced, which significantly should significantly help the Scotch whisky industry. So that's really welcome. And obviously, the Indian market is a very big market, and trying to make sure that market, for example, can be well supported by product from Scotland is an important contribution to take that forward.
As a Scot, is there a strange feeling of, we have this amazing product, but we know that alcohol has its issues, and Scottish people have had their issues with alcohol. So on the one hand, you've got this amazing product that looks great, sells well, makes money, is very much associated with us. On the other hand, you can argue there's a guilty sense that it's a whisky, that it's alcohol. Do you feel that?
Of course, and
You do.
That's, I think, the dilemma at the heart of many of the questions that we wrestle with in relation to the alcohol industry in Scotland. Scotland does have a problematic relationship with alcohol in general. We've taken steps through minimum unit pricing of alcohol to try to address part of that argument. There is also a need for us to have good public awareness campaigns about the impact of alcohol consumption that is taken to excess. We've got to stress the arguments around about responsible alcohol consumption. And all of these messages are central to how we take forward our relationship with all alcoholic beverages. But we have to take them forward in connection with whisky. But what I would say is that I think the whisky as an industry is a very iconic, it's a very well established, it's a very significant part of our economy, and it's one that certainly doesn't fit into me to be part of the part of alcohol consumption that gives Scotland a real problem. And I think it's important to recognise that in the wider discussion we have about the promotion of Scotch whisky.
The other thing the Scotch Whisky Association said was a lot of their costs are infrastructure. A lot of our distilleries are on islands. Again, Annabelle from Nicknean talked about, you go down this little road and there's the distillery. So the islands need ferries. We've got these roads, the A9, and it is the question about infrastructure. Do you think there's a chance? Well, I think they'd like a little bit of upgrading when it comes to things like the A9, the ferries, and the Scottish. I know it's the beauty. You can be on some single track road somewhere, and it's wonderful. You know, there's passing places, you wave to people, the sheep stop you. On the other hand, it's a cost. Where are we with infrastructure and upgrading our infrastructure?
There's a lot of infrastructure investment that's underway in Scotland, and just now there's a stretch of the A9 between Tomatin and Moyne. Of course, Tomatin Distillery is right at the epicentre of the A9 upgrading that's going on just now. So there are infrastructure upgrades such as that underway at the present moment. But I do think and obviously a lot of investment in ferries, and we are strengthening the ferry network. It's been a tough period while we're waiting for new vessels to arrive, but new vessels are arriving, and that will strengthen our links. I do think, however, your question does highlight a dilemma, John, that part of the uniqueness, the unique character of some of these places is, as you recounted there, and I love a drive along a single track road and the passing places and waiting for cars to pass you, and as long as you're not in a hurry, it's lovely. And waiting for a flock of sheep to get out the road. So that's part of the majesty, the beauty of rural Scotland, and it slows you up definitely at times, but it's also part of the character. So I think, yes, there are strategic infrastructure improvements that we need in our country, and we are delivering them. But there's also, I think, some parts of our country that their character is enhanced by the unique nature of their topography.
And you wave? One finger,
yes.
2 fingers?
Yeah, I would tend to be a bit like that, I think,
I'm more the Isle of one finger.
Well, there's various techniques for all that.
You're a busy man. Thank you for talking to us. Just before you go, when do you plan to speak to the US president anytime soon?
I don't have any immediate plans to do so, but obviously this is the issue we've talked about here about whisky tariffs is an important issue for me, and I felt I've opened up an opportunity to pursue that. So should the opportunity arise for me to try to advance these issues with President Trump, I would certainly take the opportunity to do so.
John Swinney, Scotland's First Minister, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, John.
We're never going home. We're never going home. Can we stay with you in Scotland for the rest of our lives? We're never going home. Never going home. All it took was one sip of